Welcome back! Today, I will talk about an urban legend. Have you heard about the black-eyed kids?
The black-eyed children, also called black-eyed kids, are mysterious beings. What is a black-eyed child? A black-eyed child is an urban legend of supposed paranormal creatures with pitch-black eyes that resemble children between the ages of 6 to 16, with pale skin and black eyes. They normally wear dark old clothing or hoodies, and are in a group of 2 or more. They are only seen at night. They come to your car window, or knock on your door, and ask for favors. If it's using your phone, to make a call, to use the bathroom, or ask for something to eat. Any reason to enter your home, or your car. No one really knows where they come from. Extraterrestrials, vampires, and of course demons, are a number of the assumptions around the kids. Black-eyed children, also known as BEKs, eyes are completely black, not just the pupil. The sclera and iris as well. As far as the encounters go, the journalist Brian Bethel was the first person to document his encounter online in 1996. However, there are documented encounters that go back to early 1900s. They just had no name for what it is, in the way that we refer to them as BEKs. There are many people who never reported them, since it really is not something most people ever want to talk about after the encounters. In 2014, a British paper reported that sightings of black-eyed kids around the world are rising.
This Halloween, a real encounter.
This is so funny. I'd never heard of BEKs before my incident, so I come on here to tell my story. Let me preface this by saying I'm by no means a writer, just a domestic engineer living in North Texas. Also, I don't believe in the paranormal, ghosts, demons, aliens, whatever. However, I did have an event happen to me this Halloween, I have to admit, has me scratching my head. So, it had been a slow, trick-or-treat night in our neighborhood that evening, which is pretty odd in itself. We usually have kids from different areas dropped off in ours, and have a constant parade at our door. That night, I'd say we'd had no more than 8 or 10 groups of kids come by the entire night. It was about 9:30 p.m., and my husband and I were sitting in our family room, watching some of those ghost shows, based on, supposedly, actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that stuff, but I do like a good ghost story, now and then, and it was Halloween and all. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over half an hour, and it was getting late, so we decided to turn the porch light off and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog and is very docile. We only put her in her crate because we were afraid she'd try and get out to play with all the kids, and I didn't want to have to chase after her down the street. Also, we didn't want her to scare any of the kids, because she would look a little intimidating to the younger kids. So, I turned the outside light off, let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch, and lay down at my feet. It was getting close to 10 p.m., when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night, and was going to go upstairs, take a shower and get ready for bed. After all, it was Thursday, and he still had to get up early the next day. My teenaged son was out with his friends at a local haunted house, and wasn't expected back for another hour or so, so that left me alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe, doesn't mean those shows don't freak me out a bit, and being alone now watching, I'd have to say was kind of on edge, as it were. It wasn't long after I heard the upstairs water for the shower turn on, when there came a light knock, 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 at the front door. My initial reaction was, what the hell, really? It's almost 10 o'clock, go home. But soon, an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows, and in the dark and without the porch light, it would be extra obvious to anyone there. I paused. I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door has a big beveled glass panel, and anybody right at the door could see in enough to see someone was in the family room, watching TV. It would be pretty rude for me to just sit there and not answer it. Knock, 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 again from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, and she was gone. My gaze followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there, as she normally does. Nothing, she wasn't there. I stood up to look around the room better, and found her crouching by the back door, like she was wanting out. However, she never asks to go out like that. She always comes and licks my hand, or puts her head on my knee. This was totally out of character for her, and I have to say, heightened my anxiety. "Chloe, crate," I said. She just turned back to look at me like, "Hell no lady, I ain't moving." I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. Knock, knock, knock. About that time a car drove down our street, and cast just enough light on the door, to where I could see the silhouettes of two small children, through the glass. I instantly felt relief. It was just some kids, probably a couple of my neighbors, on their way back home, that wanted to stop by, and show me their costume or something. I headed to the door, and looked back, to make sure Chloe wasn't going to follow. What a great watchdog, I thought to myself, as she just sat there. I turned on the porch light, when I got to the door, and sure enough, I could see through the glass, that it was a couple of pretty small kids. A little late, for such young ones, I thought, and I began to wonder, about what kind of parents would let their kids run the streets, that late at night. I only opened the door enough, to where I could block Chloe's escape, if she decided to grow some balls, which was only about 2 feet. What struck me immediately, as odd, was the kids weren't wearing any costumes, they were in normal street clothes. Also, no customary trick or treat either. I began to feel very uneasy again. It was a girl and boy. The girl, to my left, was older, I'd say about 11 or 12. I could tell she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features, as our lights are from high above, and on columns at the front of the porch, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I had not opened the door wide enough for any light from inside to hit them directly. The boy was younger, and about a foot shorter, I'd say 8 or 9, and looked to have light brown hair. The girl very politely spoke up, "Mom, can we please come inside, and use your phone to call our mom?" As she spoke, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone of their own these days? I couldn't remember the last time I'd had anybody asked to use my home phone. Hun, don't you have a phone of your own you can call your mom on?" I asked. This was when things really got weird. Both kids turned to look at one another, like they were going to say something to one another, but neither ever spoke. They both turned back to me, and the girl said, "Mom, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here, and my brother is scared." I have to admit, there were two competing feelings going on inside me. The first, that of a mother's heart, that wanted to help these two small children get to their mom. The other, a sinking fear in my gut, that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then I noticed, that during the short conversation, I'd already opened the door a few extra inches, which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number, and I can call her myself?" Another pause, and they again looked at one another. After a short moment, they turned back to me, and the girl said, "Mom, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside, while you call our mom?" And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer toward the door, like she was going just walk on in by me. As she did, She stepped into the light coming from inside the house, and I got my first real good look at her. Solid, jet black eyes, that's all I could see. That motherly instinct was gone, and replaced by terror I don't think I've ever felt in my life. I could feel every hair on my arms and back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where just my face was able to stick out. The little girl stopped and again pleaded, "Please Mom, we're really scared, and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us." Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when the fear took over, and I shut and locked the door. "I'll call your mom, if you give me the number," I shouted through the door, "but I'm not letting you in my house." I could still see them, stand there on the porch, just staring at me, through the beveled glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs, to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. That would have freaked me out even more, to not know where they were. After what seemed like forever, but probably only a few seconds, I decided I'd call my neighbor, that lives across the street. As I made my way to the side table, by our couch to my phone, I glanced at the back door. Chloe was nowhere to be found. We later found her in the guest room under the bed. When I got to my phone and started to look for his contact info, it was only then the kids stepped away from the door and began to walk to the street. As they did, I walked to the door to get a better look, to see where they went, still not calling my neighbor. If you get close enough to the glass, you can see out enough to make out people's shapes, but you can see much detail. Of course, standing that close to the door would make you pretty obvious to anyone outside looking in. From the door, I could see that the kids were still standing under the street lamp, nearest my house, staring at me. As I lifted the phone to my ear after calling, only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met my neighbor out under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't believe in any of this stuff, and had never even heard about black-eyed kids before talking to my friend. What I really think, what I have to think, is these kids were just out yanking people's chains on Halloween night. But I will say this for them, they were good. Really good at it. They scared the S out of me and my dog.
Second encounter, the midnight caller.
It almost felt like a dream. I woke up to my dog, Lucy, barking. She was upright on the bed where my husband and I were sleeping with our 22-month-old daughter, staring at our door, like an unknown stranger was out there rummaging around. I thought she was just freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her for 3 months, and she was still a puppy. It could have been anything, our roommate, a creak from the house settling, the awnings moving outside in the breeze. I wasn't too concerned initially. I decided the best bet would be to open the door and show her nothing was there. It sounds a bit silly, but it's what we do with our daughter when she gets scared, and I figured it should work with a puppy, too. I opened the door, and she raced to the front door. She stood there, snarling at the door. It was an angry, violent growl, one I had never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her, and opened the baby gate blocking the doorway, planning to open the door and show her everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumped toward me, and when I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temper. She whimpered, almost like she was afraid, and backing down. As her mannerism changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing, and sinking at the same time. I had been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the peephole. I can't explain why I looked, but I did. Outside were 2 kids. One was just a smidgen shorter than me, and didn't look much younger. I'm 21, and she looked to be 16 or 17. She was slender and pale. Her hair was a light shade of honey blonde, and she wore it long, about mid-back, with long, thin, blunt bangs in the front that covered most of her eyes. She wore jeans, a light wash, that's popular right now, and a thin-looking olive-colored pullover-style hoodie. She held the hand of a small girl, who looked to be around 3 or 4, in the same style jeans, and a button-down ivory cardigan. The smaller one looked at the floor shyly, but had the same shade of hair, tied back in a ponytail. She held a stuffed toy under her free arm, and it was identical to one my daughter has, as was their style of dress. Had it not been for the feeling of overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children in, and given them some tea or hot chocolate, to get them out of the bitter cold. Something about them seemed off. At this point, I hadn't made any noise, I hadn't shushed the dog or grumbled, nothing. I hadn't turned on any lights. These kids had no indicators I was at the door. The older one spoke. She had a voice that was mature, confident, strong, and accentless. She held her head tilted downward, and I couldn't see her eyes. She said, "We have to use your phone." I stood frozen in fear. How did she know I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that was when I saw her eyes. There was a reason, I couldn't see them through her bangs before. They were black, or midnight blue, or a dark purple. They were otherworldly. She said, "Our mother is worried." As someone who has always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what she was, the second she looked at me through the door. I have never been one to believe in these things. As a staunch atheist, and skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, I had written off many a ghost story, from friends and family members eager to tell their tale. I didn't believe it. Still, I couldn't rationalize my way out of this. I was standing with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black-eyed kid. There was no questioning what was right in front of me. I did not answer her. Slowly and silently, I backed away from the door, Lucy still cowering at my ankles. She kept talking. "Just let us in to use your phone." I took another step back, and with that step, the tone changed. At first, she seemed polite. When I took that second step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. "We're not going to hurt you. If we wanted to do that, we would have broken in. I'll ask again. May we come in, and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the door, and I inched backward, though something inside me seemed to be slowly pulling me back toward the door. It wasn't a physical pulling, so much as a subconscious need to go back and let them in. I got to my room, covered up the window, locked the door, and sat there in the dim light of the nightlight. I heard her call me back to the door, once more, and then quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and I haven't slept right since. I know from reading about them, that BEKs can't just come in without permission. I know they haven't hurt anyone, but I still fear I'll be the exception. When I told my husband, he said it was just a dream. He keeps telling me to forget it, but this lingering feeling of sadness, this dread when the house is silent at night, this fear of a knock at the door. This tells me otherwise.
Sometimes, they can occur in dreams.
I used to live in a what I can only assume was a haunted house. I have never had lucid dreams, or sleep paralysis in my life, never, except, that is, for in that house. Never before, and never since. Once every 2 weeks or so, I would have won there. One of those dreams was about a black-eyed child. Now, when I say black-eyed child, please understand, where the eyes should have been, there were only 2 gaping holes, black as the night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was walking back to my house in the dream, where the sidewalk goes by a small park, with a sandbox. There was only one child playing in the park. He was maybe 6 years old, wearing normal clothes, coveralls and a shirt, with a small plastic shovel. My house is just down the road, quite visible from where I was. The child's back was to me, but as I passed by, the child stood up, from where he was kneeling in the sand, and turned to look at me. It was then that I saw the eyes, or lack thereof. I continued walking on, but the child began to follow me. I began to walk faster, and the child continued to follow me, matching my pace. I recall looking back, and the mouth of the child opened up, to reveal an equally black void as the eyes, lined by many large, pearl-white pointed teeth. I started running, and got to my house porch. I jumped up those steps, and slammed and locked the door. In moments I was at the window looking out, but the child was gone. This dream is haunting me till this day. In the cold, it has been found that they only breathe when about to speak, and even then, their breath doesn't have a fog to it when it's cold out. One encounter mentioned, when he refused to let a girl into his home, with black eyes she bared several rows of shark-like teeth.
No one knows what happens when you let them in. Don't let them in. I dare you to subscribe for more scary stories, urban legends, and creepy encounters. Unless this was too much for you. See you in my next video.